Hey everyone, welcome to episode 90, that's 90 of the Penciled In podcast. We've made it this far. We are doing the first episode of 2024, so that's pretty awesome. And for this episode, Lindsay Grayling over there and myself, Ingrid Hardy, are inviting Gary Gerani on the podcast, and this will be fascinating. Welcome to the show, Gary. I cannot wait to hear everything you have to say.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and the two of you are obviously very, very knowledgeable and really, into this stuff. So I'm sure we'll have a really good conversation about it.
Hello, Gary. I'd like to start by asking you about how you first got interested in trading cards.
Okay.
Can we have some history on that?
A pretty, logical question, right? Well, probably the same way that most people got interested. You were a kid, and you went to your local candy store. I guess you call them convenience stores now. And the way it generally worked for us kids is that we would first stop would be the comic book racks, okay, and then the magazine racks, which were close by, because first you look for your favorite comics, then for Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine or that kind of stuff, and then the last stop of what you usually did in the candy store was at the candy counter to see if there were new trading card products out. And for me, as a kid, you got to remember, I was born in 1953. I just turned 70 just recently. So I'm, of that generation. So I was a kid from the early 60s. Basically, that's when my earliest memories are very late 50s, early 60s. And one of the great pleasures was going to the local candy. We had a great one right at the corner, which I didn't even realize at the time was actually a Topps test store. So what that meant was that there were certain stores that Topps would put test products in just to see how they would do. They weren't nationally released yet. And that's why there were more incredible Topps products at Mr. Pecker's candy store than in most candy stores in Brooklyn, because I was lucky. I mean, it happened to be a test store. All kinds of cool.
That's so interesting. I never realized they did that. Was this when do you know the year Topps was founded? Was it when they were first starting out, or was it just to test the new products?
Well, Topps have been around, for quite some time. My involvement, again, as a kid was just like any other kid. I responded to the products that they were putting out. And usually those products were linked in some way to something that was happening in the world, whether it was based on a TV show or an event or a presidential election or something. I mean, Topps would put out cards on just about anything. So it was kind of timely, too. And then the other cool thing about Topps is that if it wasn't based on some movie or TV show or something that was currently happening, we would create our own original, goofy, crazy kind of humor products, and usually with off-color flavoring, barfing and farting and all this kind of stuff. We knew kids love that because the kids weren't allowed to really talk about that kind of stuff. Adults would wag their fingers. So we at Topps understood the kid mentality. Meanwhile, I'm still a buyer now. I'm still a kid, and I'm responding to all of the above. I'm buying movie monster cards, which have photos of the Frankenstein monster and the creature from the Black Lagoon, all these other favorite characters. And at the same time, buying Mars Attacks, okay, which is a classic example of a self-created Topps product. And at the time, we kids didn't know what it was. Is this based on a movie? What is this? Because we weren't familiar with things like that. So it was very, very exciting. And then, there'd be Uber slob stickers. There'd be goofy, silly things. And of course, just Bazooka bubblegum, which was a penny. So we were covered. We had it all there, and for relatively little money, a kid could go to the local candy store and have a great time. I know I did. So
were you able to take them to school and show your friends and swap them?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the usual. You trade them, you swap them, you do all that kind of stuff, and you share your common interest.
Yeah.
I mean, people would always say, "Oh yeah, you flip your trading cards," which is all true. Although kids don't really flip them anymore because they're too valuable. You don't want to damage your valuable cards. But the shared interest. We spoke about Star Wars. Where that was a perfect example. Where when that movie came out, our cards were almost part of that revolutionary 1977 transformation that Star Wars brought with us. Everything changed. Our entire pop culture world changed, and kids were able to. You couldn't get this stuff that easily anywhere else. So our cards offered a million photos from the movie. And my God, if you were into it, wow. Didn't even matter if they were a little redundant, because after a while, I was just picking pictures that, how many shots of Han Solo in front of the Falcon with his gun? I mean, it was just always different variations of the same thing, series after series after series. We exhausted their photo library, but kids loved it, and it was a great way for them to share this thing that they loved, which is kind of what I did when I was a kid, so it was coming full circle for them.
You mentioned about them creating their own licensed products, their own characters and things like that. Was that something they did in-house, or did people approach them with these ideas and maybe show them a portfolio of work? Or
well, it was interesting because we had what we call the new product development department. Now, this is when Topps was in Brooklyn, and that's also significant. I mean, you think of Brooklyn, and Topps belongs in Brooklyn in a way. It's part of the old world. It's part of nostalgia, right? So Topps was this wonderful, magical company that all of us kids who lived in Brooklyn knew was in Brooklyn. It wasn't too far off. And every now and then you drive your bicycle past it. It wasn't in the safest of neighborhoods in a way. But, Topps was there. And so they had their new product development department, the point of that department was to have people there who would develop products that kids would enjoy. And like I say, in some cases, it was licensing products of pre-existing. Back in the early days, it was whatever your fad was. In the 50s, it was Elvis Presley or Davy Crockett, or these were the fads of the day. As time went on, Elvis Presley became the Beatles in the early 60s. You'd always be tapping into the same kind of thing that kids were getting into. So the new product development department was responsible for tapping into whatever was hot that kids were into at the time, and at the same time, this is what you were asking about, the self-created stuff. We would have fun creating our own. So remember, Topps was a gum company, and they had the baseball card thing going, which was part of the all-American thing that was part of their own history. So it wasn't that hard to jump from that to create these funky little products that you could sell in wax wrappers the same way, baseball cards, whatever, and peddle in the same way on candy counters. So we found that it was an interesting balance between the funny things that we would create and the things that we licensed from movies or television.
Judging from a few of the people that we've interviewed in the past, I think nearly everything that was put out struck a chord with someone somewhere, as a lot of the early top stuff has been mentioned and all that.
We were a bunch of big kids ourselves. I mean, when everyone who worked in that department got it. We were all like, ooh, wouldn't it be cool to see this? And ooh, wouldn't that be fun? And we enjoyed getting off on what I used to call the gleefully subversive aspects of our products. Kids have very little power, I mean, they're under the control of their parents and their teachers and all that. So we gave them that naughty little world. We would create products that were like fake out products that you could put in your loose sleeves that would look like loose sleeve pages, but they had goofy jokes and all that. So we knew the kids would laugh and would say, yeah, you're just like we are, and would buy our products and would enjoy that. And yeah, like I say, we did get off on kind of like, yeah, spite the teacher, I mean, sometimes that would go a little too far, and the authorities would get a little annoyed at us, saying, "What are you doing?" But for the most part, people saw the fun, and it was all innocent and goofy stuff,
Was Mars Attacks where did that exactly come from?
Well, it came from the fertile minds of Len Brown and Woody Gelman. Len Brown wound up being the fellow who was still at Topps when I joined the company in '73. He's the one who hired me. And Len was but a younger fellow in 1962, I guess, when he wrote the text for Mars Attacks. Len was always a science fiction fan, and as was Woody. Woody Gelman is a name that you may know from past nostalgia. He used to be the head of Nostalgia Press, which put out originally all the little Nemos and reprints of Flash Gordon, Alex Raymond. He was into all that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, I even did a book that never got off the ground. King Features kind of changed their minds about it. A beautiful fumetti based on the movie serial on Flash Gordon with Buster Crabbe, where we broke it down chapter by chapter, very much in the style of the Alex Raymond illustrated Flash Gordon. So Woody was into all of that, as was Len, and as was I, who came into the company years later. So back in the early '60s, they just kind of, let's try something different. Let's create the ultimate science fiction thriller and make it more violent and sadistic than anything you could possibly see in a movie. And of course, that's how we kids were. It's like, oh my God, wow, we've never saw anything quite this intense before, turning a death ray on your pet dog and, incinerating your family. And I mean, it was and here's another thing about the original Mars Attacks. Remember, it was created in the early '60s. So there was no sense of humor about it. Science fiction thrillers from that period were very serious and very straight. So now we think of Mars Attacks and the Tim Burton movie and the Ack and the funny, they're kind of pixie gremlins, kind of like aliens. But the truth of the matter is that card set had the impact on us kids the way The Exorcist had an impact on the nation years later. It was so intense and so strong. And for years and years and years, I wanted to do a movie. I always envisioned this incredible movie based on it. And years later, after I co-wrote Pumpkinhead, the horror film with my partner, Mark Patrick Carducci, I got the rights for Mars Attacks. So we actually wrote a very serious, intense script. And then eventually that didn't happen, and Tim Burton came along and did his funny take. But yeah, I still say a very serious adaptation of that original card set should happen someday.
Well,
that's amazing. How did you first get involved with Topps? Like, how did you get a
Well,
job from being
another
a kid?
amusing. No, that's a good question. It's a very amusing story because, generally speaking, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but most people, you don't set out in life to have a career writing trading cards. I mean, it's kind of a funky, fun thing that you enjoy doing, whatever. But as a kid or a young person, I knew I was going to get involved with film and with creative work, with art and music and film, one way or another. Uh, uh, but what happened was, I wrote an article for a publication called the Monster Times, which was a movie monster magazine. It was the first thing I ever wrote. I just got out of high school. And it was Confessions of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. It was the creature talking about his entire experience in Hollywood and coming from Brazil in the prehistoric era and coming over here becoming a big Hollywood sensation. So it was a very humorous article. Well, that's kind of the style of Tops's humor. And when Tops was doing a card set called Creature Features in the early 70s, what happened was Len Brown was reading the Monster Times, and he liked my work. He liked the humor in my stuff. And another key thing was that he was a film collector, and I was a film collector. So I had a classified ad in the Monster Times saying, "Hey, wanted sci-fi film." So there's a lot of reasons for Len Brown to connect with me, and he did. He called and he said, "Hey, your articles are very funny and clever, and you want to come down and write some trading cards, write gags for us." That was how he put it. "We're doing movie monster cards, which would be perfect for you." So I said, "Gee, sure, why not?" At this point, I'm thinking, ooh, there's a whole world before me of fascinating things to do. I wrote this cool monster article. Who knows what I got? Now I'm doing trading cards. Oh, that's kind of fun. I always like trading cards. So I went down to Topps, and that in itself was an amazing experience. And the people there were wonderful. And the very first day, not only am I shown photographs of movie monsters, and okay, write gags, they shoved me in this little cubby hole of an office, which is like a storeroom for a lot of their old products, which was kind of fascinating too, just looking around. And there was an old typewriter that I got to write the gags on. Lo and behold, the same typewriter that Mars Attacks had been written on. Okay, so this was like sacred to me. And I'm doing the gags. They seem very happy. They said, "Come on, listen, we'll take you in the back room, something else here." I go, "Okay, what next?" Okay. What happened was, it's fascinating. Back then, if you tied into movies, the movie studios, if it was a monster movie or something, okay, they'd clear the rights to the monsters. You could have Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, because usually they were makeup and whatever. But the human beings, the actors who might be in the same photo, let's say the creature is carrying Julie Adams around in his arms. Well, they didn't clear the rights for Julie Adams, all the different actors. So what you had to do is we had to film our heads of people who worked at Topps and drop our heads over the actors' heads in these photos. It was still a creature carrying a girl, but now it was the head of the girl who was working in the office, right? Well, I got to appear in two cars. I stood in for Boris Karloff in one, and I don't know, Oslo Stevens for another. And they said, "This is great, we'll take your picture." I signed a little release. And so not only did my trading cards come out with my funny captions, but then my face was actually in a couple of them. So this was my first day at Topps.
Because
How
from
could
what
you
you've
not
said,
love a company that puts you through this the very first day you're there?
from what you've said, you went straight from school. You wrote this article. You're basically headhunted because your work was great. I mean, how old were you when all that was happening? You must have been like.
Well, like I say, I was just out of high school. I was going to college, and in Brooklyn, and this was like part-time work. I was also doing a lot of writing, not only for fun monster magazines, but for film magazines and television magazines, all that kind of stuff. So I was thinking, oh, okay, I can sort of have a career as a nonfiction writer, writing about films, things that I love and I'm interested in. Okay, that's cool. And I'll do this creative work for Topps for a few years. I mean, the people here are great. It's a lot of fun. So I'm thinking, all right. The other thing I wanted to do is, I sort of mentioned, was to write screenplays, is to create fiction. So these are all my ambitions. Topps wound up being a stepping stone to a lot of that. It was through my friendships of the people at Topps, Len Brown, Woody Gelman, that I sold my very first book, Fantastic Television, which I did in, was it 1976, which was the very, very first book to deal with shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits and Star Trek. All between two covers. There have been books out on science fiction movies, but never about the small screen stuff, which was really significant. And so that was my first book, and that was through the help of my friends at Topps. You know, they took me up to Crown Publishers. They had done a Winsor McCay book, I think. They did, yeah, and they said, hey, we one of the guys who works for us is really great. He's got this great idea. So Topps became a wonderful conduit, a stepping stone for other things.
So if I may interject, I think what I'm getting from all this is that actually, once you got out of school, of course, you knew kind of what you wanted to do in life, but you pretty much just took the opportunities that became available to you to kind of guide you along your way, if I may say, which I have to say, in talking to a lot of artists, because we come at all this from an artist point of view, it can be really difficult to find your way in life when you are an artist. But taking my cue from you and a few others that we have come across who've actually managed to make a living out of what they do, be it what it may, really being open to what tends to fall into your lap a little bit, poking it, see if it's nice and warm, and then just going with it.
Very, very well put there. No, that is absolutely true. The one consistent in all of it, creative work. It had to be creative work that I got excited about. I could get excited about writing about episodes of The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits or something like that. I can get excited about writing a screenplay where my own original characters doing things. So the common denominator in all of this is it has to turn me on creatively. And let me also mention something else about the artwork angle of it all. I thought I was going to be a full-fledged illustrator. I went to the High School of Art and Design in New York. I'm friendly to this day with some people who went on to become successful illustrators. My good friend Joe Shardello became the president of the Society of Illustrators, and all that kind of thing. So I thought I was going to just be an artist. Okay, it's one of those things that when you're a kid, you have some natural ability, and you can. It's like a little superpower you have that other people can't do. They go, "How could you do that? I can't draw a line." And you have. So I kind of said, "Oh," and then your parents go, "Oh, that you're really good," and they encourage that. Also, I came from an Italian household, so there was art and music and all those wonderful influences constantly. And my parents, thank God, encouraged when they saw that I was creative, that I was into this, and I had some talent. They weren't like some things, horror stories you hear about the parents who say, "Oh, no, get a practical job and don't do that. It's not manly to be an artist," or whatever it was. You would hear this stuff, right? Well, no. My parents were classically Italian in that regard, in that they appreciated art and music. And when they saw that I had artistic ability, they were tickled pink. So I thought I was going to be an artist, went to the High School of Art and Design, and then toward the end, I began to get a little discouraged because I saw so many other artists who I thought were way better than I was. And I was pretty damn good, I thought, but you know, you get a little overwhelmed. And then I started selling my writing. And I began to think, well, gee, I that's creative, and I'm getting a lot of pleasure out of that. And maybe I should kind of put my focus on that. But the amazing thing is, when I was hired at Topps, I was able to tap into my artistic illustration abilities, because I would do drawings of concepts, original ideas, and I would become an art director with the artists, the really great illustrators that we would hire to do different projects and all that. And I very often would so that artistic ability thing, even though I didn't pursue a career specifically as an illustrator or whatever, Topps enabled me to make use of that. It enabled me to make use of all of my different creative abilities. But I was going to be an artist. I mean, it is interesting how, as you were saying, I let fate push me into the creative areas that presented themselves. In no time, like I say, I'd be doing a book about TV shows, and I'd be writing a horror movie, you know, a fiction work. So it's whatever I was lucky enough and was good enough to be able to do. And that's the way it's been my whole life, essentially.
Do you think some of it has been to do with your attitude in general? Because we've met you today and you're so chatty and friendly and optimistic, and you can tell that you had a lot of what's the word, determination, or you know, enthusiasm for what you were doing.
Enthusiasm, childlike enthusiasm for the things that I love. Yeah, that goes a long way, because people like that. They want that in themselves. You know, they recognize it as, oh, this person kept the kid alive in himself, and that's good. You never lose your enthusiasm. You know, I do. Even though I'm retired, I'm still publishing books, and I never stop. Right, but among the things I do are commentaries for Blu-rays and 4K releases of classic movies, where I get on and say, hello there, this is Gary Gerani, film historian, blah, 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 and you're a host for whatever the movie is. And then for the next hour and a half, I just blather on and on about the movie after having done some research, and, so it's not empty calories. But that's another example of that. And I just got a review recently that said, oh, Gary Gerani's infectious enthusiasm. So it's like, oh, yeah, if that's what it is.
Straight away, we could tell straight away.
And being Italian, I use my hands a lot, right? What can I do?
Elaine, Lindsay, we have
to do that one.
Okay, well, anyway.
Moving right along. Well, we have a friend, a communal friend, who is also a publisher and an artist themselves, and is of Italian descent. So of course, food becomes part of it. And she's also she's
very, very animated with the hands. Yeah, it seems to be a trait. Also, all Italians can sing. Be my love, for no one else can end this year. I'm over 70 now, but
that's awesome.
I'm going to go with that.
I can't
Mario Alonso in every Italian guy.
My singing
For those who know who Mario Alonso is,
my singing is the audio equivalent of an elephant trying to walk on a tightrope. No, I don't bother with that.
Go ahead, Lindsay. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to go back to Topps, and how long did you work for them for?
Oh, I'm about two years short of half a century, because I started, it was a 72, 73, whatever, and my last job for them was in 2020, which was the year they closed their doors. And that's the year that COVID hit. Everybody was either fired, laid off. Topps was closed. The company, as you know, as you were saying, has been sold and has been cleaved in half, and God knows, right? But yeah, my last job for them was a Star Wars card set in 2020.
Which set?
What? Sorry, go on.
Which set was it?
Oh Jesus! It was one of those overview sets, whether it was about the rebels or about for a while. Most of the sets that I were doing were thematic, and there'd be all the different movies of all the different earlier versions and later films where you just be mixing characters together in different thematic ideas. And we had some really good ones. I remember for years and years, I proposed all kinds of things. I think did we finally do the Women of Star Wars? And I mean, all these like things that I remember proposing, and I don't even remember anymore. I'd have to look back.
I think they did do that during my.
I would actually do it. Yeah, one of my favorite ones in recent years was another concept that I remember saying, "Oh, we got to do this," where we have cards written from two different points of view: the point of view of our heroes, and then the point of view of the Empire. And it was so interesting writing propaganda for both sides. We think of Star Wars as here's our heroes and our villains, but they're basically fighting political factions here, and there's lying going on both sides, I'm sure. So it was kind of fun and more interesting as a challenge as a writer to write sets like that where there's
propaganda
embedded into it. Yeah, there's a little more subtext in it.
I missed that one. I totally would go find that one if I knew which one it was. I think I missed that one. Or did they not put it out?
Oh, that one they put it out, and I forget the name of it, but it's something like perspectives. It was a word. It was a word that suggested the different points of view. You'll look it up. It's in there because that one I'm sure was done. I remember writing it anyway. It was pretty involved, and I'm pretty sure that one was done. But and then of course over the years, two big Star Wars things happened in the 90s. In the 90s, everything changed because up until that point, it was pretty much mom and pop stores that were our audience. But then in the late 80s, all of a sudden the comic book thing became very big. And it was the world of direct sales came into existence. And that meant that there were comic shops where you could sell directly to the fans. You didn't have to go to outside sources. And it was a lot more inviting for a company like Topps, which was basically a mainstream company. I mean, it was a national major. It wasn't funky little local. No, it was pretty. So most of the stuff we had to do generally had to be mainstream hits. Things like what the comic books were doing, it seemed to be a little more specialized. But somehow in the 90s, those worlds came together, and that's how Topps Comics came into existence. Lenny and I, for years and years, wanted to do comic books at Topps. It seemed like a natural, right? Well, this finally enabled that to happen. So in the 90s, everything began to change. And we were now creating products really directly for this market. In terms of Star Wars, is why I started this little thought here. Other companies were doing very, very well with the Marvel universe, which were painted cards or whatever of the different Marvel characters. So Ira Friedman, who is now in charge of new product development, and I, even though I was had just moved to California, I moved to California in 1989, still being Topps, they said, hey, listen, why don't, we have the Star Wars license. Why don't we start doing more than just sets based on the individual movies? Because at that point, that's all we had done. The three classic films, and we did second, third series of them, that kind of thing. So why don't we do our own creative stuff? So I came up with the concept of Star Wars Galaxy. And even the name, at first, and you could see where this went. Ira's going, okay, we're going to have our Star Wars universe cards. I said, no. Let's use the word galaxy. First of all, we don't want to just imitate the Marvel thing, but galaxy is a Star Wars word. It didn't take more than a few seconds for Ira said, yes, that's it. So Star Wars Galaxy became a wonderful card set that was an art set, a combination of art used in the creation of the movie, like storyboards and designing of characters, art used in the promotion of the films, like posters from all over the world, all the great art, and finally art inspired by the movies, where we hired our own wonderful illustrators, some of the top people who are out there in comics and otherwise. I brought Joe Smith. Joe Smith was one of my favorite illustrators, who had done all the classic movie poster paintings over the years. Ben-Hur with the chiseled in stone letters and all that sort of stuff. Well, I got friendly with this guy. He was an older fellow at this point, but he still had his talent. So I hired him to do every single portrait of every single Star Wars character, very much in the style of the Ben-Hur portraits he had done in the 60s. And as a kid, when I had seen the movie in the theater, I'd gotten the souvenir book and seen all this.
Were you a little bit starstruck?
Yeah. It was a thrill to kind of take that and do it this way, right? So Star Wars Galaxy came, and that was kind of a big deal that they still keep doing. And then the other big one that I created, including the name, was Star Wars Wide Vision. Now, there had been occasionally taller and longer trading cards in the past, but they never really made a big impression. And I finally said, why don't we do the ultimate Star Wars cards? For years, we've just been doing the stills and the transparencies they provide and the pose shots and all this. Why don't we actually blow up images, CinemaScope images, and print them on CinemaScope cards? And then on the back of the cards, you could have the CinemaScope storyboards to show how this shot was originally designed, and other little pockets of information, because it was a long card. You could put different little stations of information in there. So to me, that those Star Wars Wide Vision cards were state-of-the-art trading cards. I was very, very proud of those. So yeah, even though I've done countless Star Wars sets, some of them, like the ones that I've mentioned, were really quite wonderful. I mean, I do have.
Well, it's funny, like, having worked on these and having worked on some Star Wars Galaxy and stuff like that, speaking to the person who came up with that idea.
Whoa.
A little bit like, woo.
What excitement,
if it hadn't
right?
been for you, we wouldn't have done that.
And then eventually, we even published a Star Wars Galaxy magazine, which I did some articles for and all that. So yeah, that term became used quite a bit. What the heck? It was a logical. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that galaxy was a perfect Star Wars word.
I mean, I know one thing that artists quite miss, from back in the old days of Star Wars, was the variety of styles you used to be able to do. Before, I think before Disney took over, when Lucas.
Oh yeah.
Sold it to Disney.
Well, that's a very good point, because when we first started this Star Wars Galaxy, George was very excited about it because it was adding new imagination into his creations, and he would sometimes be open to things that a few years later, forget it, you'd never be able to do. For instance, we did a set, one of the Star Wars Galaxy sets. I remember I had one card that has artwork of the Rancor, and I'm explaining how it was a genetically created monster that Jabba had in his house, which of course was my own notion. And then in the same series, I've got a herd of Rancors, like tons, like buffalo, being herded by Jabba's spaceships. A completely different explanation for what these creatures were. Two different origins in the same card set. And Lucas, said, fine, what the heck? It's all imagination. But a few years later, they would get stricter about that kind of thing. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, I see, I look on eBay at different cards and things, and I see just some amazing parodies and crazy styles and stuff. And then, eventually by the time I got to work for them, it was just realism and stick to the
Yeah, I mean, even as a
movies and
writer, I have to say the difference between what we used to be able to do, and then all of a sudden, once Disney got involved, how limited and controlled everything was. It took the fun right out of it. I mean, I guess the average fan still got his fix, but it was not the same. And I mean, and plus, I mean, from my standpoint, I mean, I was getting older, and the world was changing in general, so now I think of what we had as being very, very special.
Well, like, for example, you can't do blood and gore and things anymore. Like, maybe they can't be as brutal, like you were talking about earlier, the things that got
like the attacks.
Yeah,
because
it was a bit brutal.
Tops still doing some Mars Attacks and Dinosaurs Attack type sets. I think they combined them at one point. At one point I was saying you should have Mars Attacks versus Dinosaurs Attack, and they actually did that. a little set. So they did take it. The folks who came after me did take it to another level, but I guess that's all over now, pretty much.
So where do you see yourself going on then, seeing as the Star Wars universe with Topps has kind of lost its thrill a little bit, shall we say? It's kind of, well, it has moved on to its own thing. What do you see for yourself as being like super inspiring and creative and for you to do?
Well, funny you should mention that, because right here on our stage, folks. Okay, this is my book, The Card King Chronicles. Yes. It is the first of 5 books. This is the first one is the 70s, which is when I first started with Topps. Okay, and you can order it. Is that legible? Is that coming through?
Fantastic.
I can't see.
Well, I'll be dropping the links down in the show notes.
I came prepared in a very low-tech way, but what the heck?
Yeah,
and here's the thing. So in terms of what I'm up to now, I mean, I'm retired from Topps, and as we say, Topps, forget it. But in terms of what we've done, there's so much to celebrate. So many people were after me to do my creative memoirs on the hundreds and hundreds of sets that I've worked on for Topps over 5 decades. So it was finally, that's what I'm doing. The first one came out just a few months back. Volume 2 will be out in 2 months. Okay, and I'm going to keep every 6 months. I'm going to knock out another one to cover. Then finally, all 5 decades and everything will be there for those who care. And just to show you that there's additional excitement going on out there in the real world, look at this. They're putting out a Dinosaurs Attack action figure.
Awesome.
That's coming.
I love action figures.
Yeah, June of this year. This is the dinosaur devil god creature that I created that comes out at the end of Dinosaurs Attack. It's not just dinosaurs attacking people. They have an evil god watching over them. So that ups the ante, right? And even better than that, in the way we did the set, we photographed all the people once again in the office, and with photos of their screaming faces, I posed everybody screaming. Our painter could work from those photos and make the paintings that much more realistic. When it came time to cast the character who was the scientist who starts all this trouble with the dinosaurs, I cast myself in that role. So this is the face that plays Elias Thorne, whose time stream accident brings dinosaurs back into modern day. And the best thing is, at the end of that story, this dinosaur devil god grabs me, and I'm an action figure too. I'm an accessory to an action. I'm the little scientist in the claw of the creature. So talk about a subtle form of immortality. Here it is.
Do you know what? Crazy scientists are just the best characters anyway, aren't they? I love the crazy.
well-intentioned scientists who make big mistakes.
Yeah.
So usually they're trying to do something good for mankind.
Yeah.
It's the old man who played God thing, sooner or later you got to screw up and bad things.
What is it? The good intentions.
I guess it all comes down to Frankenstein. You're doing it for science, for whatever, but watch out because you are imperfect as a human being, and as a result, bad things. Well, I mean, that's an old trope, I suppose.
The road to doom, or whatever, is paved with good intentions, something like
The
that.
road to hell. That's it.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Absolutely. And Dinosaurs Attack, I made sure, like I say, wasn't just going to be about dinosaurs munching on people. That had to be because that's what you were buying. But I have all these really sick ideas and sub-themes that are built into the. I mean, we eventually did a graphic novel and comic books based on this Dinosaurs Attack thing. And that's where we got even more into the fact that our hero doesn't believe in God. So that's why he's kind of stepped into God's shoes, because he's an atheist. We should have a God watching over us, right? He doesn't believe in God. But at the end, when we realize the dinosaurs have a God, well, gee, maybe we have one too. So even though he's dying in the claw of this thing and he has defeated them, he's kind of found his faith again, if you will, like the end of The Exorcist. So their ideas are embedded in this thing that are so flaky, that are so like totally out of my crazy head.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't need to feel fun of the munching dinosaurs. I made sure that was there.
Have you done that? You could do a little nod to Jurassic Park where he gets eaten on the toilet.
Well, you know what happened? I mean, Dinosaurs Attack came out before Jurassic. I mean, I felt, okay, I'm going to be the guy who brings back the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Everything is coming back. George Lucas brought back Flash Gordon. I'm going to bring back the dinosaur pictures we all grew up with, right? So I did this Dinosaurs Attack thing, designing it as a film at the same time as a card set. And apparently Michael Crichton was a big fan of the Dinosaur Attack cards. And that inspired him to write Jurassic Park. And I had a movie deal with Warner Brothers to do a major movie based on Dinosaurs Attack, and I worked out the deal with Topps and everything. I was on top of the world as a young screenwriter and all this. I have this massive movie now based on my creation. And then the Jurassic Park comes along. It isn't even fully written. He sends his galleys out to all the movie studios, and all of a sudden, that steals my thunder and my Thunder Lizards. And that
was it a case of whoever got there first?
But Joe Dante had optioned it after he did Gremlins. He saw what I was doing. He said, "Oh, we got to do this, right? Whatever." But even he was thrown by when Jurassic Park came along. And then in the 90s...
And how annoying that they did such a good job of it as well.
Well, let me say this. This concept with the mosquito and the it was brilliant. I mean, to this day, I'm convinced that will work. Just based on that concept.
Well, not just that.
I like very much what I came up with, but it was more like a takeoff on 50s and 60s sci-fi, a space station, a big ray beam, all that kind of stuff. Whereas this was really great. So quite did a fantastic job with that, and I'm glad he liked the cards. But it did steal my thunder, and it killed it. In the 90s, Tim Burton then optioned it to do a movie. And he was going to do Dinosaurs Attack first and then Mars Attacks. But he got scared off by Jurassic a little bit too and decided to go Mars first. And then that didn't do that well, so that ended the whole thing. So Dinosaurs Attack was actually optioned twice. And then I optioned Mars Attacks with my buddy Mark Carducci after Pumpkinhead. We were going to do, as I mentioned, that serious version.
So Mars Attacks.
Wow, what story!
Quite that's it. Mars Attacks really has quite the long story to it. I had no idea.
Let me just, I will take care of it. Hello. I'm going to disconnect this phone right now. I should have done that anyway. I'm sorry, you were saying about Mars Attacks.
Yeah, it has a historical trail to it that I had absolutely no idea that it had. I mean, from the imaginations in the offices at Tops to possibilities of doing all kinds of things, and I'm sure that it will come back again. If
Yeah, I actually asked Tops about that when Tops was still Tops a few years ago, and I said, look what happened with Batman in the 60s. They did it as a funny, campy thing. And then eventually they realized, wait a minute, there's something deeper and richer here that we really didn't tap. So then they brought it back as the Dark Knight and did it serious. Like, well, we could do the same thing with dinosaurs, with the Mars Attacks. It was done as a goofy, campy thing. Yak, yak, yak. Okay. Now let's go back and do it right. Why not? Just the way, follow what Batman did. But apparently the deal with, I'm not sure what the deal is with Warner Brothers. They made a crazy deal with Warner's where Warner's kind of owns it. And I guess Warner Brothers wasn't interested. And I don't know. But yeah, you could do a great horror version of you could do it as a mini series for television. I could see that skull face coming out of the blackness, complete opposite of the Pixies. You know what I'm saying? But
I mean, as aliens, it's a really cool design, isn't it? Like, and nobody else designed.
Yeah, I'll give you the story about that design, which is pretty sick in itself. Okay, that design came from two different inspirations. The main one, and this was hysterical. Len Brown had an old movie monster magazine in his office called World Famous Creatures, which came out in the early 60s. And lo and behold, there was this article about the movie This Island Earth with the Metaluna mutant, okay, which is this big bulbous-brained alien creature. Well, that's what the Mars Attacks alien was based on, so much so that in that old magazine, the page is cut out. You see the cutout section where Len Brown cut out the picture of the Metaluna mutant to send it to the artist so that he could duplicate it. That's where one major inspiration comes from. The other major inspiration is pretty racist, I have to say. Topps did World War II cards with the Japanese being the equivalent of the Martians. So that's why our Martians are little. That's why the skull faces have the teeth. It was a variation of the racist Japanese World War II soldier thing that they were doing. So that's the inspiration for the Mars Attacks look. This island Earth and a rather offensive takeoff on the Japanese soldiers of World War II.
I mean, when people were over there fight, I mean, my granddad fought in World War II and he actually got captured. So he didn't have a fond opinion of those guys.
Yeah, no, well.
We understand
no.
Fighting with each other. It's just, and we're way past that now, aren't we? So.
No,
it's a crazy world.
I understand, sure.
Yeah. But, so, what is... Sorry, go on.
This just made me want to ask you your opinion on licenses, because obviously you've had a lot to do with different licenses.
That was probably my area of expertise. I was the movie and TV guy. We had the other guys who handled what we used to call the slob humor, which is Wacky Packages and Garbage Pail Kids and all that kind of stuff. Art Spiegelman and all those wonderful artists and great underground artists and people that he brought in who were incredible people that I fully appreciated. I could do X amount of that, and I did X amount of that. I actually designed one of the Garbage Pail Kids prototypes. But my area was really more the movie and TV stuff. So anything that we tied into, I was the guy doing it. And that would sometimes just be trading cards or stickers. But then I had to come up with sticker albums, which were very popular in Italy with the company Panini. and Pops tied in with them, and they said, Gary, can you redesign the sticker album, the European one, so that it works a little better for American kids? So I redesigned it. I made it a little so that it could fit into the slots and magazine racks and candy stores, that kind of thing. And we did Annie, we did E.T., we did Gremlins, or in sticker. So that was another use of a license. And then how about candy containers, gremlin heads filled with candy?
Is that like the pet?
Creatures, 3PO's head filled with it, Darth Vader's little plastic head filled with it. So candy containers became another standard thing. Then a couple of years later, souvenir magazines. Now this was an entire. I remember the first one I think I did was the Batman movie in 1989, and then we did a bunch of them. We did the Rocketeer, we did Dick Tracy, we did a whole bunch of them, and they were basically beautifully designed souvenir magazines, full color, that could be sold, in magazines just like anything else, and would serve as a licensed souvenir magazine from the studio. The way years ago in the 60s, you'd go to a big movie theater in Manhattan, and they would sell it. They'd have a program book for the movie, The Sound of Music or something that you would buy or whatever. Well, that mutated into souvenir magazines, which served that purpose, but which were also sold to the general public. So if we get a license, whatever it was, we would plug all of these different formats, into that license, and usually
make full use of it.
Come up with something, design candy containers. I remember with Star Wars with Yoda, we couldn't get his ears right. So the first candy container Yoda, he's got these little ears. He doesn't have these big, wonderful ears, right? What are you going to do?
Oh, so interesting.
Please go ahead, Lindsay.
Has there been the most favourite thing you've created so far or worked on? Like just a period of your career that were just, this is my favourite thing ever?
I used to be able to say that, I guess I still can. I've already mentioned a few that I'm very proud of. The art sets where we work with these great artists, and the wide vision, which really did justice to the film. But if I had to, and of course, Dinosaurs Attack, which was my Mars Attacks. I mean, I designed every storyboard, I wrote every card, all that was me. So that one I cannot help but be my baby. But I did a set called Universal Monsters Illustrated, which we did in the 90s. Now, as you recall, we were talking about the old-fashioned monster cards, which had funny captions, pseudo-funny captions on the bottom. Hi, I'm the new babysitter. That'd be Frankenstein monster. Okay. That had been our format for years. And then we wound up doing a color version, Fright Flicks, which was Freddy Krueger and Halloween, and even my monster, Pumpkinhead. So all of a sudden it was the modern monsters, but with funny cap. Hi, I'm the new babysitter. It was great. So we kept that tradition going. But in the 90s, I wanted to do a really serious one. And we tapped into Universal Studios, and we took 10 of their greatest monster movies and hired 10 great illustrators to reinterpret the film through their eyes. Okay. And it was nirvana for me. Again, as an art director, I would come up with an idea working with the artist. There's a scene in The Invisible Man where the Invisible Man sends his victim tied up in a car careening over a cliff. And we hear him laughing maniacally as the car goes over the cliff and the guy screams and everything. Okay. So working with the artist, I said, why don't we have the thing going over the cliff, but maybe put a giant smile in the sky as he's laughing, or, and so we would work these ideas out together. So even though I didn't become an artist, I could live through, with real artists, with great artists, a lot of these ideas. So Universal Monsters Illustrated was, I think, a really remarkable set. And I have a lot of the original art on my walls here that shows I really...
With the Pumpkinhead character, were you the first person to do a Pumpkinhead guy then?
The Pumpkinhead, I'm sorry, a Pumpkinhead...
You said you created the Pumpkinhead character.
Yes. Okay. That now I take one cap off, my baseball tops cap off, and I'll put on my screenwriting cap. Okay. Wanting to get into writing movies, and of course I loved sci-fi and monster movies and all that. It was my buddy Mark Patrick Carducci, who was a childhood friend, and back in the 70s, we had created the Demon of Revenge. Okay, and we put him in a Super 8 or 16 millimeter movie that we were making, and we did storyboards. We didn't even wind up making the film. We used my old Creature from the Black Lagoon mask to serve as the demon. It was, we dressed it up a little, all of that. So the Pumpkinhead character, who is the Demon of Revenge, first came into existence when Mark and I created it as a character in a movie that we never made as kids. Okay, years later, he's now got a foothold as a screenwriter, and he comes to me and he says, "Hey, I've got these producers who want to do a horror movie, and they got the name Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead was a poem written by Ed Justin. They licensed the right to the name Pumpkinhead because they thought it would be a good name for a horror. I had no idea what the movie was going to be about, but they thought it would be a good name for a horror movie. So Mark comes to me and he says, "Hey, they've got this name, Pumpkinhead. Why don't we dust off our old Demon of Revenge and make him Pumpkinhead?" And it was like, wow, okay, great, So the name Pumpkinhead was not our creation. It was the creation of Ed Justin, who, by the way, I kind of knew because he was in the licensing. He was honest Ed Justin. He would license other properties. And he wrote this poem just as a lark, just to how these crazy worlds converge, right? So we then write Pumpkinhead as a screenplay, and we explain that this Demon of Revenge came from the pumpkin patch, area, whatever. So the locals, the country folk, called him Pumpkinhead because he came from that. We even put a line in there to explain that, because some people were just saying, "Wait, he's called Pumpkin. It should be a jack-o'-lantern head on a human body, right?" That's what most people would expect. And we even had conversations about that with the producers, saying, that is maybe what they're going to want from this. But once Stan Winston got involved, you got the man who created the Queen Alien, who was working with James Cameron on the greatest monsters ever created. You're not going to tell him to put a jack-o'-lantern head on it. He's going to create something original. And of course, the Pumpkinhead creature, which he did not personally create. His two main effects guys, Alec Gill, those two guys who went into business on their own eventually, and they all remain friends. They actually created them, and Tom Woodruff, who co-created, actually played Pumpkinhead, was in the costume. So they were Stan's top designers. Stan was free to direct the movie while they created the monster.
Wow,
so I mean, how that came out.
As a creative, it's so much better not to kind of hold on too tightly to what you created in the first place. Perhaps it could evolve and become something different and be used in a different way. And because once you've created something, you can get very stuck, can't you? Like, that's my baby, sure. And I want it to be like this. And,
What was interesting about this is that it was really a new creation made up of bits and pieces of what we had done before. So we could mold it, and it could evolve as we were doing it. And like I say, once Stan got involved, it kind of went in its own direction. And
was there any? Have you? When I read Sandman by Neil Gaiman, there's a character in that called Merv Pumpkinhead, and I was like, is that inspired by what you've done somehow? Sorry, sweetheart.
Oh, hello there.
Yes, this is my spawn.
Oh my goodness, hi! That was a great horror movie moment, because it could have been a creature coming in to get you or something.
He is a creature.
I've been doing this.
I must just keep us on track a little bit because we will soon have to head out. But there are two things I'd like to touch on. First of
Gary's just too fascinating to talk to, I can't.
having back on. I mean, this is just incredible. But we want to talk about your books, and I also want to mention listening to you talk and many others before you that we've talked to. The world of fiction is much more important than many people understand, really. Fiction has such a deep effect on us, even if we're not aware of it. People can never go see Star Wars and it's still going to affect them because it just touches everything. The Pumpkinhead, for all we know, and Jurassic Park and poetry, even though I never read poetry, but it's somebody you meet reads. All this fiction is just, it blows me away how it touches people. And seeing someone like you who's so enthusiastic about everything you've ever done, and it's all been fiction, pop culture, all this kind of stuff. Are you proud of what you've done? I mean, that's a silly question to ask because obviously you are, but you've affected a lot of people and probably will continue to.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, because that's like saying, all right, you're past 70 now. You've lived your life. Hopefully you'll have.
Not at all. I'm getting up there.
Okay, no, I'm still going strong, right? But you do ask yourself. You say, what did I do with my life? And as you say, are you proud of that? And yes, I am. Part of me feels, to be perfectly honest, that I never really reached my full potential. I always felt that I had something even more in me that sort of never managed to happen. But I don't want to think about that too much, because I'd rather think about what I did do, the glass being half full. And
but as you just said, you're not done yet, and the fact that you feel
I know. You never know.
Drive the tractor a little further.
I mean, look, I just did my first feature-length documentary, Romantic Mysticism, the Music of Billy Goldenberg. Billy Goldenberg was my favorite film composers. He did all of Steven Spielberg's early TV work, Duel, all that stuff. And ultimately, John Williams became Spielberg's main composer, but Billy was his first guy, loved his work. And that went over really well. I won awards, Best Director from the Cannes World Film Festival and all that. And here I am as an older guy. Wow, how cool is that? So I know there's still more fun, interesting things that I might wind up doing. But based on, in all fairness, this is the year I turned 71. What I have done in the past, the thing I'm most proudest of is the fact that I got away getting through life, being able to make a decent living doing creative work. Okay, I never had to do, work in a bank or do anything else that, frankly, I never would have been able to pull that off. I would be too eccentric. It never would have worked. So thank God, whether it was writing books and magazine articles or working for Tops or writing movies or whatever, I was always able to find something to sustain me. And that I'm very proud of. Now, that said, I'm very happy as a kid who was a monster kid, who grew up loving Famous Monsters magazine and all that my childhood buddy and I, Mark Carducci, created Pumpkinhead, which is a famous monster of filmland. Very proud I was able to do that. That's so cool, because the movie itself turned out really good and the creature is just great to look at. So very proud of that. But probably the Tops work and all of this stuff that we're talking about probably is my most unique legacy, because I did more than anybody else in all areas relating to it. And when I was a kid, I was a lonely little kid who used to need these distractions. They would make my day. Okay, if as an adult, being able to do that for new kids, that I could make them feel good the way these things made me feel good. Okay, I grew up with Mars Attacks. That made me, got me all excited. Well, then I gave kids Dinosaurs, and I gave them another one like that. So I felt like I gave something back, and I did something good for kids like me who needed this escape from reality. You talk about fiction. That's what it's all about. The real world is very depressing, more so than ever. And we need these escapes. So yeah, I'm very proud that I made a lot of kids happy. When we could just
Starlog magazine way back in the day was what did it for me when I think that was in the 70s and 80s. So I had them all. I read them from cover to cover, the artists in that book, the storytellers, all that stuff, because we lived in a small town. So you didn't hear all that much, but yeah, all these things you do.
I hear these things from people, where they say, "Oh God, it meant so much to me to have that." It brightened my day so much, and I know exactly how that feels.
So on that note, talk again about your books before we head on out the door. Please tell us a little bit more about your series.
Okay, yeah. Basically, like I mentioned before, there are going to be 5 books in the series covering the 5 decades that I created products for Tops. And essentially, it's just going to be going through each and every one with pushing my brain cells to remember as many interesting little stories connected to the creation of all of them. And luckily, as you can tell, there are fun stories to relate. And the books are, they're only available through my website and at the conventions I go to. I will make them eventually available probably on eBay and Amazon, whatever. They do have a barcode. But right now I'm aiming them directly at the collector and fan who's into this. And like I say, volume 1 is currently out. Volume 2 will be out in a couple of months. I'm finishing it right now. And they're full color. It's funny because those kinds of books usually, like if you you publish through Amazon or whatever, it's black and white. The cost of going color, it suddenly began, well, this had to be color. I mean, how could you discuss the different choices for wrapper colors without showing the darn thing in color, right? So that's why I went to my own printer and just made sure I was able to get a decent deal printing the book in full color. That's it.
We're going to have all the links down below where people can go to buy the first one and then eventually all the other ones as well. If people want to find out more about you, where should they find you? On Facebook? On your web?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. That's the easiest place to find me. By the way, one other thing I want to mention about the books before I forget. You talk about sketch cards. Well, with each included in every copy of the book are 2 original sketch cards of Gary Gerani creations. The colossals read about in the book. When I first joined Tops in the 70s, I wanted to do another Mars Attacks kind of set, and that's when they set me straight and said those things cost too much to make and they never sell because nobody knows what they are. So I had proposed an H.P. Lovecraft kind of ripoff called the Colossals, which were going to be giant gelatinous tentacled creatures from other dimensions wrecking cities for that effect. Well, we never did it, so my sketches are in the book, but we will include sketch cards of the Colossals, new ones. Okay, and then the Card King Kitties, which are basically little caricatures that I will do of Star Wars characters or Star Trek, any of the other things that we did movie or TV card sets on. They're little parodies I've done. So you'll get 2 free cards, sketch cards, in every copy of the book.
Cool. Awesome. Lindsay, do you have anything else you'd like to ask before we?
I just wanted, like, you showed us your action figures. Is that something that's coming out soon as well as your books?
Yeah, the action figure comes out in June, I believe, middle of this year. A company called Super 7, which also did a bunch of Mars Attacks action figures. And that's just so cool that they did it at all. I mean, I'm going to be able to hold up a little Rice Krispie sized version of me, mini me, say, hey, I made it this far.
So is Dinosaur Attacks, is that going to be a card set that's coming out, or is it?
Oh, well, no, I mean, it's the original set that came out in '88, and then we did, all variations and comic books and all that. I have no idea. I mean, I don't even own it. I mean, it was a work for hire, even though I created it, so Topps can do whatever they want with it, frankly.
Is that everything?
Who knows?
Yeah, you've got your figure, you've got your books.
That's right. So I'm doing okay.
This has been fascinating. I'm already thinking it would be really cool to have you on again. If you'd like to come back on, because you have so many stories to tell us.
Absolutely. No, this is a lot of fun, because talking to people who are so into it, we're all having a good time. And I'm assuming the people who are going to be watching this will also be having a good time. So, yeah, there are so many crazy, there's this half a century's worth of crazy stories I can hit you with. So, no problem.
This has been amazing from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And all the best luck for your books and everything. And I can't wait to see all the new things that you're going to come out with in the next 50 years. It's going to be awesome.
That's great. Okay. We'll see what I'm up to, right?
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me, and have me back some other time, and the adventure will continue.
Yay.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary.
Take care now.